quiet young pilot, mocked as the Bookworm, for spending more time reading tactical manuals than drinking with the squadron, finds himself alone against 6 enemy fighters. Everyone expects him to panic. Instead, he executes a move no one has ever seen, something born from sleepless nights studying old aviation manuscripts and physics theories. His trick confuses all 6 enemy pilots and changes the fate of an entire mission. Before we begin, one question: where are you watching from today? And if stories of courage, just an unexpected heroes move you, please subscribe, because we honor the silent warriors the world overlooks. He should have been dead within seconds. The sky around him boiled with smoke trails and silver flashes of incoming fire, streaking past his canopy so violently it vibrated his ribs. His aircraft, an aging multi-role fighter whose paint had faded from years of desert sun, shuddered under the stress of evasive maneuvers it was never designed to withstand. And then the voice came over the radio, sharp, mocking, certain of victory. Target isolated. Bookworm's alone. Finish him. It was the insult that had haunted him for years, spoken now by the enemy, repeating the very words his own squadron had used behind his back. For a breath, the pilot named Elias Ward allowed himself to feel the weight of it. 6 enemy fighters. One of him, and no one coming to help. Yet beneath his fear a strange, steady calm pooled, like a hand closing gently over his heart. He whispered to no one, not even to himself, a simple truth he had lived by since childhood. Knowledge is quiet until it saves your life. And then he pulled off a maneuver no one on Earth had ever seen. Long before he faced 6 fighters alone over an empty stretch of desert, Elias Ward had lived most of his service life under a soft blanket of underestimation. He did not look like a pilot forged from fire or adrenaline. He wasn't the kind who swaggered through hangars with shoulders back and aviators tucked into his collar. He didn't fuel himself with cheap bravado. His strength came in gentler forms. He was the one who stayed late in the squadron's dimly lit lounge, tracing diagrams from decades-old flight manuals with a pencil he never quite wore down. The one who read obscure studies on airflow dynamics and annotated the margins with cramped, meticulous handwriting. The one who noticed faint hums from engines others considered good enough, and pointed out hairline cracks before they became disasters. He never boasted, never argued, never sought credit, and because of that, because his voice was soft and his intellect didn't shout, many mistook it for weakness. Bookworm, they called him. Sometimes as a joke, sometimes as a jab, sometimes as a dismissal disguised as camaraderie. Elias accepted the nickname with a half smile, because he knew names were just noise. But every pilot carries scars, and silence is its own kind of armor. Elias grew up on the edge of a forest, where the wind rustled through pines in a constant whisper of unfinished stories. As a child, he spent hours watching hawks carve paths across vast fields, captivated by how they banked, dipped, and shifted with the invisible currents he longed to understand. His father was a mechanic with hands permanently stained by engine oil. His mother was a librarian who loved the smell of old paper and spoke of books as if they breathed. From them, Elias learned that the world had 2 kinds of knowledge: what you could touch with your hands, and what you could hold in your mind, and that both mattered. But there had been loss too. His older brother Jonah had been a pilot before him. A bright, brave soul with a laugh that echoed through every room he entered. Jonah died in a mid-air collision during a night training exercise. Official reports blamed poor spatial awareness. Elias never believed that. Jonah had been many things: reckless, daring, defiant. But he had never been careless. It was this quiet ache, this unanswered question, that drove Elias to study flight in ways others never bothered to. He read until his eyes burned, memorized old war memoirs, experimented with aerodynamics on hand-built drones. He trained with a solemn promise folded inside him. He would never let ignorance take another life. By the time he joined the Air Force, he carried not only skill, but a silent grief that shaped him into a man who looked at the world with deep, observant eyes. And yet, despite this quiet brilliance, he wasn't treated as an equal. The squadron Elias joined was a tightly knit unit, skilled, proud, and wary of newcomers, especially those who didn't fit their archetype of a fighter pilot. They were loud where Elias was thoughtful, bold where he was introspective, impressionistic where he was analytical. Their teasing began playfully, but over time a colder undertone crept in. Whenever Elias offered an observation, about terrain or weather or fuel efficiency. Someone would chuckle and say, "Here comes the Bookworm report." If he cautioned against unnecessary risks, someone muttered, "You worry too much." If he analyzed flight maps more carefully than the rest, someone joked, "Can't believe you're reading again." If he tried to help, someone smirked, "Let the real pilots handle it." And the base commander, he watched these exchanges with arms crossed and lips sealed. Silence, in his case, wasn't neutral. It was complicit. The squadron laughed at Elias again the morning of the mission. They stood around the briefing room, tossing casual insults in the air like coins. Elias listened without flinching as one pilot snickered, "I hope the Bookworm brought his bedtime stories. He'll need them when he freezes up again." Another added, "He's too soft for combat, probably memorizing poetry instead of maneuvers." Elias looked up only once, meeting each gaze with eyes that held neither anger nor shame, only a calm rooted so deep it unsettled them more than any retort could have. He simply said, "Preparation isn't fear. It's respect, for the sky, for the machine, and for the ones waiting at home." The room fell briefly silent. Not in agreement, just confusion. They didn't understand him, not yet. The squadron launched shortly after dawn, engines roaring against a pale sky tinged with early gold. Their orders seemed simple: intercept and monitor an unidentified formation skirting Allied airspace. It should have been routine. But war has a way of transforming routine into catastrophe without warning. Halfway through the flight, the squadron's formation fractured following a misinterpreted directive. Elias reassessed instantly. He recognized the maneuver as a trap, a feint often used in older conflicts. He tried to warn the others, but his voice was dismissed. "No offense, Bookworm," one pilot said, "but save the theories for your notebooks." Moments later, enemy aircraft burst from the clouds like claws made of metal and intention. The squadron scattered in panic, uncoordinated and vulnerable. In the chaos, Elias found himself drifting alone, isolated from his team, facing 6 hostile fighters accelerating toward him with lethal precision. He could hear the panicked chatter from his squadron, but no one answered his calls. He wasn't sure if they couldn't hear him, or simply didn't listen. The enemy saw their chance. And that was when the mocking voice crackled across his comms, repeating his squadron's nickname for him like a final insult. "Bookworm's alone." The 6 enemy fighters tightened their formation around Elias, moving with predatory ease. They had numbers, speed, and altitude, all the tactical advantages. Elias felt his pulse slow instead of spike. Fear sharpened most pilots, but it centered him. He studied the spacing of the fighters, the angles of their wings, the way they dipped slightly to the left, an indication of weight distribution he had read about in air combat manuals long forgotten by modern pilots. Every detail mattered. Every detail was information. He whispered a line he once read in a dusty memoir from a WWII. "When they surround you, let them believe they have already won." And then, calmly, almost gently, Elias cut his throttle. His jet lurched as speed bled away like warmth from a dying flame. To the enemy, it looked like a rookie mistake. To his own squadron, watching from miles away, it looked like fear. They didn't understand what he was doing. Not yet. But a hidden ally did. Captain Marilu, stationed in the command center far below, had always noticed Elias's brilliance. She respected his silence, his precision, the way he studied rather than spoke. She had tried to advocate for him once, suggesting he be allowed to lead tactical seminars. The idea was laughed out of the room, but Mara didn't laugh. She watched him the way a mathematician watches an elegant equation take shape. Gradually, meaningfully, undeniably. So when Elias cut his throttle, she understood the theory behind it before anyone else did. Altitude trap, she murmured to herself. A rare maneuver. Part aerodynamics, part physics, part audacity. Something only someone who read too much would ever think to attempt. Her heart pounded. "If he pulls this off," she whispered, "they'll never call him Bookworm again." The enemy pilots tightened formation, believing Elias was stalling from panic. That was precisely what he wanted them to think. As they swooped in for the kill, Elias engaged a maneuver so unorthodox, so counterintuitive, it existed only in a handful of outdated textbooks. The inverted compression slip. It required perfect timing, a natural trust in physics, and a willingness to momentarily surrender control. It was not a trick used in any modern military. Too risky, too misunderstood. But Elias had studied it, practiced simulations, memorized every variable until it lived in his bones. He rolled his aircraft inverted, cut power again, allowed gravity to seize him, drag him downward like a stone. The enemy pilots overshot, expecting him to cling to linear momentum. Instead, Elias dropped beneath them, slipping into their blind spots so abruptly they lost track of his position. The sky erupted with confusion. Enemy aircraft scrambled, swerving wildly to avoid collision. 6 fighters, 6 errors, 6 hearts pounding in disbelief. Elias restored thrust at the lowest possible altitude, mere meters above desert sand, and slingshotted upward with terrifying acceleration, reappearing behind the enemy formation before they even realized he had vanished. In that moment, the predators became prey. And then he delivered a quiet line, spoken with the soft confidence of a man who had always known his worth. You should never underestimate the strength of a mind that's prepared to survive. Back at the base, Elias' squadron watched the live feed in stunned silence. No jokes, no laughter, no mocking smiles, only awe. Elias didn't fire recklessly. He didn't let anger drive him. He outmaneuvered the enemy with precision and restraint, forcing 3 fighters to waste their missiles through miscalculation and guiding the remaining 3 into a pattern that exposed them to Allied interceptors racing in from the west. By the time backup arrived, Elias had already neutralized the threat, without taking a single life unnecessarily and without sustaining a scratch. When he returned to base, his jet rolled to a silent stop. The hangar doors opened to a crowd that felt very different from the one he had left that morning. No one moved at first. Then one by one, even the loudest skeptics, stood straighter, shoulders rigid, eyes lowered not in shame but in respect. A quiet honor guard formed unintentionally, instinctively. Captain Mara Lou stepped forward first. She didn't salute immediately. Instead, she offered a quote he had once written in the margin of a safety report she reviewed. Mastery is quiet. Arrogance is loud. Only one survives the sky. The squadron absorbed those words with a weight that sank deep. Finally, with deliberate reverence, Mara saluted him, and the rest followed. For the first time since joining the squadron, Elias felt something shift, not in others but in himself. A release. A breath he had held for years. A silent recognition of his own worth. He did not smile. He simply nodded as a hawk might respond to the wind, acknowledging, not boasting. No one offered verbal apologies. They didn't need to. Their silence was apology enough. One of the pilots who had mocked him earlier approached with hesitant steps, eyes unable to meet his. Elias waited, not with bitterness, but with patience. The man handed Elias a small patch, the squadron's insignia. "It's yours," he said softly. But Elias shook his head and returned it. "It was always ours," he replied. The other pilot swallowed hard, humbled. In that exchange no anger lingered, only understanding. Later, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and cast long shadows across the tarmac, the entire base gathered for a debrief. Instead of recounting maneuvers or tactics, the commander did something unexpected. He stepped aside and allowed Elias to speak. Elias didn't talk about physics or strategy. He didn't mention the insults or the loneliness or the years of being dismissed. He simply said, "Courage isn't loud. Sometimes it sits alone in a corner, reading, and sometimes, when the moment comes, it saves everyone." Those words echoed through the hangar like a vow, a lesson, a gift. From that day on, the nickname, Bookworm, transformed from a joke into a badge of honor. A reminder that brilliance often looks quiet, and that heroes don't always roar. They sometimes whisper. In the end, Elias Ward taught his squadron, and anyone who heard his story, a powerful truth. Respect everyone, especially the quiet ones. You never know whose mind will save your life. Wherever you are watching from tonight, thank you for being part of this story. If this touched you, if it reminded you of someone who fights unseen battles, share your thoughts in the comments. And make sure you subscribe for more stories celebrating the silent heroes who walk among us. Their courage deserves to be remembered.